Okay, I think that's recording. Okay, as an apologist, I do not do original research, and I am not a Bible scholar. I don't have a degree in Bible or anything like it. I'm a scientist, okay? But because I don't do any original research, all of the evidence that I collect and talk about was generated by somebody else. And up front, I need to go ahead and say, well, here's where I'm getting my information from. Don't want to be accused of plagiarism. So let me go ahead and attribute most of my material from whence it cometh. The first one here is a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek. He belongs to he started an organization called Cross Examined. He is one of the best Christian apologists I know. And I think the first two lectures come pretty much right out of his book. And I reference it later on. I've got 4 copies of this if anyone wants to borrow and look at it. It's only about $12. I encourage you, if you're at all interested in the knowing why Christianity is what it is, then this is a place to go. And I'll refer to that often. For the Bible history of how we got things, I use the How We Got the Bible by Neil Lightfoot, and the the, the Bible of the Bible with all the facts and figures is in this beast. This is not a beast you read. This is a beast you use for reference. And that's The Journey from Text to Translations by Paul D. Wegner. So those are my sources. And now I am not plagiarizing, I am researching. Okay? All right. All right, here's that YouTube channel I was telling you about. Okay? So if you go out to that YouTube channel, I'll put up all of the courses that I'm teaching. There'll be a section of one topic sorts of things. And you can get there by typing youtube.com/@rathcamp_apologetics. Okay? All right. That's all the administrative stuff. All right. Any questions on the administration? Hopefully we don't have to do that again. All right, that's done. All right, so let's talk about the New Testament. I'm going to focus primarily on the New Testament, and basically the reason is Jesus referred to the Old Testament a lot. And if Jesus was God and Jesus is truthful and Jesus doesn't lie, well, then he's basically validating the Old Testament for us. Most of what our theology and our daily lives revolves around is the things that's in the New Testament. So we're going to focus on the New Testament, basically looking at the New Testament from when it was first started in the 30s, AD 30s, as a spoken word, and then going through the various stages of evolution, getting some of it written down, getting it pulled together, getting it codified, pulled it into a Bible, and then now this is in the original languages. The New Testament was written in Greek. So over the years, it had to be translated into other languages. And today we can go to a bookstore and probably get 6 or 8 or 10 different kinds of translations of the Bible, different slants. So we'll take a look at that at the tail end of it. The history of the New Testament is basically a 6-week course. And then for the last 6 weeks, I'm going to talk about how do you read the Bible, okay? How do you actually read it? There's lots of different books written by lots of different authors. Each author has his own style, own way of writing, and you cannot read them the same way for every one of them and get the most out of them. I mean, you can't read Matthew and then go ahead and read Revelations and treat them the same. They're totally different kinds of writings, and we have to understand how to read them in order to get the most from it. So that's going to be the second half of the course. All right? All right. So the Old Testament sets the stage, the New Testament tells the story of one solitary life. Let me just go ahead and read this. Here is a man who was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another village. He worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years, he was an itinerant preacher. He never owned a home. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. Never had a family. Never went to college. Never put his foot inside a major city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He never did any one of the things that usually accompany greatness. He had no credentials but himself. While still a young man, the tide of popular opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. One of them denied him. He was turned over to his enemies, went through the mockery of a trial, nailed upon a cross between two thieves. While he was dying, his executioners gambled for the only piece of property he had on earth, his coat. And when he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 19 long centuries have come and gone, and today he is the centerpiece of the human race and leader of the column of progress. I am far within the mark when I say that all the armies that ever marched, all the navies that were ever built, all the parliaments that ever sat, and all the kings that ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of man upon this earth as powerfully as that one solitary. And how we got that book tells the story. Okay? So we're looking for a story that talks about a unique and solitary man. Obviously, that man is Jesus. And the New Testament is the book that's going to talk about how we get there. All right. Getting into the apologetic side, I get regular what I call pushback. People that are not yet Christian, thinking about Christianity. One of the things we get from in pushback in the society of folks that are either kind of light Christians or not yet Christians is, well, how can you trust the New Testament? You know, do we really have something that is we can believe on, we can hang our hat on? Okay. In order to answer that question, we're going to use from Frank Turek's book here, what's called the 6 E's. Do the original copies of the Testament tell the truth? There's 2 questions there. The original copies of, okay, this book was written back almost 2,000 years ago, okay? We don't have the originals. We don't have the actual writings on the parchment that Paul or Mark or John or Luke wrote on. We have copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. So the question is, do we really have an accurate copy? Do we have an early copy? Do we have enough copies so that if one person messed with his copy, I've got 29 other copies that are the same way, his is out, throw it away. He messed up his copy. So do we have a good copy? And then the second question is, are they telling the truth? Here's a story coming from a lot of different people, from a lot of different points of view. And if you get into the Bible and start nitpicking details and cherry picking a single verse out and compare it to a single verse somewhere else, here's what looks like, hey, no, this is disagreement. Looks like this is wrong compared to that, so forth. So do we have a story that, as told by the eyewitnesses, the observers, that is the truth? Or did they make it up? Or is it a legend? Okay. So do we have enough copies close enough to their printing, the original events? And can we trust it? Did the people that wrote it, can we trust it? We know that when God wrote it through the inspiration of others, they got it right the first time. The question is, how is it 2,000 years later? So we're going to look at the 6 E's. The first E is called early testimony. If I have an early copy of something, then in all likelihood, it's going to be a better copy of something that I wrote down about an event years after it happened. I think we can all find examples in our own lives where the way we tell a story that happened yesterday is a lot different than the way we tell that story in 10 years. We start adding a little flavor, some commentary, some additional explanations, okay, that were not in the original situation. And you've seen that the game, what's it called, telephone, where you get a circle of people and you whisper something in the first one's ear, and he turns and whispers and whispers and whispers, and what comes out one end over here ain't nothing at all like what went in over here. All right, so that's 2,000 years. We could have a lot of that. We need to worry about it. All right, we'll take a look at that. Early testimony. Eyewitnesses. You trust eyewitnesses better than non-eyewitnesses. If someone is witnessing an event, you're going to get a lot better description of that event than someone who's heard it second, third, and fourth hand. Let me ask you a question. If 6 people saw an accident out here on Goodman Road, and you asked all 6 of them to describe what happened, would all 6 give you the exact same story? No, I'm hearing some no's. You're right, because of points of view. All right. Everybody's got their own point of view. They focus on things that they're interested in. They will tell you things that make sense in their life, skip other things. In fact, a good investigator, a police investigator, if they get 6 uh, interviews with 6 people that witness something, and all 6 of them are saying the same thing, you know where that evidence goes? In the trash can, and no court will accept it because they're coaching each other. So it is okay for eyewitnesses to tell a slightly different story from a different point of view, but it is not okay to have major differences in what's going on there. All right, we gotta take into account a person's point of view. I saw an example. A guy held up a ball. It was black as all could be. So what color is that? And everybody said, no, it's black. It's black. He turned it around. It was bright white. What color is that? White. So you can look at the same thing from a different point of view and see literally black and white. So those are the sorts of things we have to look about when we're talking with eyewitnesses. But overall, eyewitnesses count a lot more than later folks. Embarrassing testimony. The third E, embarrassing testimony. How many people here have gone out of their way to tell all of their friends and relatives things that they've done wrong? How about things that you really kind of look stupid? Do we brag on those? No, we don't. We somehow magically forget all of those stupid things we did, okay? And certainly when we're talking to other people, we don't describe ourselves using all of the dumb, stupid stuff we do, okay? So if you've got testimony from an eyewitness that is true and he's embarrassing himself, that probably carries more weight than non-embarrassing information. Okay, see where we're going there? All right. Hello. Stare. Either I'm shooting up here or it's too late at night. Okay. Excruciating testimony. Giving testimony that is so painful to give, it is excruciating. If you've got excruciating testimony, chances are it's right. It's probably close to the actual truth. Dry throat. Okay. Expected testimony. Again, back to the automobile accident. If 2 cars hit head on at 50 miles an hour, would you expect the 6 people that witnessed the accident to talk about crumpling of fenders and front ends? Or would you expect testimony that says, yeah, and then they just backed up and drove off? No. Based on the event, there's some stuff you expect to hear. And if you do hear it, that's good. If you don't hear it, that's bad. What is the best kind of expected testimony? Testimony that, by the way, we can't even do very well. How about prophecy? How many people here prophesied something and have it come true? Well, yeah, a little bit, yeah. If I eat that, I'm going to get sick. And I did. Okay. So that's a prophecy. If I drink that, I'm going to have a hangover. Yeah, okay. That's true. But things like, I will be born in Belport, New York. I'm going to prophesy that. Huh? You're going to prophesy where you're going to be born? No. So if you have expected testimony that is, hey, you really need to be God to see that far forward to say this is going to happen. That is powerful testimony. Okay? Last but not least, extra biblical testimony. One of the things that gives people that are not Christians a hard time, and one of the things that gives Christians who are trying to explain it to them a hard time, is you're using the Bible to validate the Bible. How do you get away with that? How do you say this book is true because the book says untrue? That don't fly far. We need extra biblical, we need outside influence, outside people to say, hey, I don't know what's going on in that Bible, but I saw that happen, and I saw that happen, and this happened, and that happened. So if I can get people that are not Christians, or back then, not followers of Christ, not disciples, people that didn't give their lives over to Christ, people in the Roman army or Jewish leadership, if they're telling me from an extra biblical point of view that these things are happening, that's pretty solid evidence. Okay. So those are our 6 E's: early, eyewitness, embarrassing, excruciating, expected, and extra biblical. Questions, or shall we dive in? All right, let's dive. All right, so first question, is the New Testament true? If we spend the next 13 weeks, 12 weeks going through and deciding that the New Testament is a book we want to read, we learn how to read it. Now, do I want to apply this to my life? If it tells me to do something that I really don't want to do I just have to suck it up and do it? Or can I say, I don't believe the Bible? Most of the difficulties with people accepting the Bible is not because it is truly wrong. It's not because what they're finding they don't like is in fact bad stuff. Almost always, when I talk to people that are pushing back, it's not because they don't believe in the Bible. It's because they don't want to change their lifestyle to fit the Bible. Most people are on a happiness quest, not a truth quest. And if you're dealing with people, friends, relatives, whatever, that are not yet Christians and are kind of going through the evidence, at least are open enough to ask about it, you can feel this. You can feel when they're pushing back, not because they really believe it's wrong, but because they're trying to avoid it. Some excuse not to believe it. That just ask the question, if Christianity were true and I could prove it, would you become a Christian? And if they're honest, they'll say no. And that's okay. They have the free will to do that. But you don't have to waste 2 hours of your time explaining to someone who ain't listening. So go have a pizza or something, do something else. All right, do we have an accurate copy of the New Testament? We have earlier manuscripts and we have more manuscripts. All right, so the Bible originally was written, the New Testament, again, I'm focusing on the New Testament. The New Testament was originally written on like papyrus, sometimes a vellum kind of material, but most of the original stuff was written on papyrus, and it fell apart. It disappeared over time. So you had to make copies of it and copies of it and copies of it. The original manuscripts, even if we had them stored in the best place, have probably turned to dust by now. So we have a lot more copies than just about any other book from that time period. They're also earlier. A copy that describes something in the Bible that was written 10, 15, 20, 30 years after it happened is much more reliable than some things that were written 1,000 years later. So let's compare the Bible, the New Testament, to other writings that came out of that period from about a couple hundred BC to a couple hundred AD. Here's a gap. I'll come back up to the New Testament on the top, but it looks good. It's a big number. The yellow is the gap in years from when the event happened that they're writing about and the actual writing. The orange is the number of copies they have of that can be traced back to the original copy. Homer, if you're a literature person or a history major or a Western civilization major in college, whatever, you'll recognize most of these authors. Homer, 643 copies of Homer's work, and the oldest copy was written 500 years after it took place. You got time to forget. I mean, you have to tell your kids and tell your kids and tell your kids, and hopefully one of the kids down the line actually remembered it. Good luck. Mine don't remember what I said yesterday. Okay? Demosthenes, 200 copies, 1,400-year gap before it's written. Herodotus, 1,408 copies. Plato, if you're going to college and you take any of the soft studies, you hear about Plato. You might even read some Plato. 1,200 years, only 7 copies. Okay, and yet your teachers will stand up there and say, "This book is good. You got to read it," and you can believe it. On 7 copies written 1,200 years later. All right, Tacitus, Caesar, Pliny. We're talking literally hundreds and hundreds of years after the events. And copies, well, the biggest one is Homer, 643. Let's look at the New Testament. The earliest gap, the earliest time we have of the manuscripts in parchment, okay, called the John Rylands parchment, 25 years. Folks that wrote that are still around. The kids of the folks that wrote that are still around. And if, hey, we're no different than anybody else. If we find someone writing something that ain't true, we say so. They're going to be on the news. No, that didn't happen that way. You're lying. Well, 25 years is still an awful lot of folks that were there, and what you're saying ain't true, but we have it. We got copies of John, the book of John. And how many copies do we have? This slide now is now about 8 years old. I haven't been able to find some new numbers. But 8 years ago, there were 5,686 copies that can be attributed to the original manuscripts. With that many copies, you can't make a mistake. When they sat down and copied a particular manuscript 10 times to hand out to different churches, we have those 10. We can look back and see if all 10 of them agree, or did someone play games with it, okay? So when you have that many copies, and it's close enough, that close to the original happening date, you can take it to the bank. Earlier and more. So yes, we'll give that a big yes. That's first E, number E, yes. All right, next one, eyewitness testimony. Do we have eyewitness testimony about what's going on? So here's the timeline. The cross is, depending on what time frame you use, it's somewhere between 31 and 33 AD, depending on whether you started 28, 29, 27. And there's some doubts about the dates, but hey, you get it within a couple of years. So somewhere around 31, 32 AD, we have the cross, all right? And then down there at 70 AD, we have the destruction of the temple. We actually have more validation on the destruction of the temple in 70 AD than we do over here on the Jesus timeline. So let's look at this list of time relative to the number of eyewitnesses. All right, we know that Paul is executed by the Emperor Nero in the mid to late 60s. So over here in the mid to late 60s, we got Paul is executed by the Emperor Nero. And that's confirmed by a lot of extra biblical documents also. Jesus' half-brother James is sentenced to death by the Sanhedrin in 62 AD. So over here in 62 AD, James is sentenced to death by the Sanhedrin, and that is validated again by extra biblical review. There's Josephus and a number of other folks that are not biblical writers, but are saying, yeah, this is what happened. The context points to early writing. So if you look at the context of these letters, it points to the fact that they're dealing with issues and problems and things were happening down here in the 40, 50, 60 range. Okay? Acts was written by 62 AD, right? Paul wrote 1 Corinthians around 55 AD. All right, 1 Corinthians over here around 55 AD. Whoops. Come on back. All right. All right, now, 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, the creed. What is a creed? Anybody know what a creed is? a creed is really a memory helper. All right, we've had creeds with us in church for forever, and a creed is like a short saying that you can memorize easily and you use it regularly. It includes key. When we baptize someone here in the church, Matthew does essentially he does a short section on the Apostles' Creed, slightly modified. So what we say there, I believe in this, and I believe in that, I believe in Jesus, and I believe that, and there's like 10 or 15 things. When you repeat that, you're repeating a creed, and that becomes almost the gospel. All right, we have a creed that is we can trace back to earlier than 40 AD. It's oral for remembrance, ask the witnesses. So if I want to check on someone's whether they knew, why are you a Christian? They just whip out the creed. But the creed is actually in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8. There it is. You probably recognize it. And at a time, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I delivered to you first reports I received, Christ died for sins, so forth and so on. So that is, we do that regularly. We talk about that. So that is a creed that is actually written into the New Testament, and that creed can be traced back to less than 40 AD, which means we're talking now less than 20 years after the events that happened. All right. Luke. Luke was written before Acts. How do we know that? I mean, that's just logic. Luke wrote Luke, and then Luke wrote Acts. All right. And he talks about things in Acts that happened back in Luke. Most scholars think that Mark was written before Luke. That's pretty much universal. Paul wrote all of his works before he died. Is that reasonable? You're supposed to laugh. That was my one joke. One joke. Paul wrote all of his works before he died. All right. All right. Moving right along. Romans, 2 Corinthians, Galatians. Bottom line, most of the New Testament was written before 70 AD. How do we know that? How do we know that most of the books were written before 70 AD? What would be an indication? Destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and nobody mentions it. Not a single soul says, Jesus was right. That thing is flattened, wiped out, gone, dead. Oh, I'm going to make my red light still on. Except Jesus. And Jesus mentions it in Matthew 24, 1 through 3. And in verse 34, when did he announce it? Before it happened. So here we have a prophecy. And by the way, it happened to be the biggest single thing that happened in that area for decades on either side. Nobody in the New Testament says, hey, look, Jesus was right. How many people here, remember, can actually point to their location, what they were doing when they saw the jets hitting the World Trade Towers bringing them down? Is there anybody who does not know exactly what they were doing? Okay, literally, I can tell you where I was standing, what I was saying, who I was talking to. That is called an impact event, a significant impact event. When you have something like that happen, you literally, everything around you is frozen in time. How many here remember what happened in 1964? We probably don't have enough people old enough. What happened in the fall of 64? Kennedy was shot. Kennedy was shot. Or 63, is it 63? November of 63? Okay. Obviously, the memory's starting to go at this age. Kennedy was shot. If you witnessed that, I can tell you the desk I was sitting in middle school, the drawing I was doing in mechanical drawing, when the guy came down the hall screaming, the president's been shot. That's a significant emotional event. That's an impact event. And what they were doing when they learned that Elvis had died. I know, I don't remember. I never followed Elvis. I mean, there. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've heard Elvis. I have heard Elvis before. Martin Luther King. Where were you at when you heard about the Lorraine Hotel? Yeah. So there's a number of them. And I assure you, the destruction of the temple, literally knocking the thing down so that there wouldn't be one stone upon another, would be an impact event if you lived there. Okay? And they never mentioned it. So chances are most books were written before that happened. All right. This is the age of the eyewitnesses. If you have this much going on, and there are eyewitnesses by the thousands, and they're all witnessing some of this stuff, what's the probability that the books that were written have been made up? What's the probability this stuff is a legend? Close to zero. Close to zero. We're not going to. You can't get away with lying that far, that long now, let alone back then, when all they did was talk to each other. They didn't have their face in the screen. I mean, they literally talked to each other every day. You know that they would have said, hey, that didn't happen. All right, so that's the age of the eyewitnesses. Can we call that reason to believe the book? I think that's a yes. Embarrassing testimony. The apostles and the New Testament writers would not make up a story that makes them look bad. Okay? You just don't make up stories that make you look bad. It looks like some of them were dim-witted. They failed to understand what Jesus is saying. There's 3 verses right there. If you go out and read them, it's like, I can imagine Jesus going, I don't believe you. Come on, get your head around this. Explain it again and again and again. And they're going off in different directions. I mean, they just don't get it. We get it now because we've had the whole book to look at. But they had paradigms, they had preconceived notions that made it very difficult for them to believe what Jesus was saying and doing. He was not doing and saying the normal. And so they looked kind of dim-witted. And they were uncaring. This is my greatest hour of need. And they fell asleep on him twice. Okay? They make no effort to give Jesus a proper burial. Crucified on the cross, only 1 or 2, or we don't know how many showed up. His mom, Mary or 2. And what happens when they took him down? It's gone. Who ends up taking care of the burials? Who donates the tomb? Joseph of Arimathea. That's his tomb. They make no effort to give him a proper burial. They're out of there. So why do we make Joseph of Arimathea look like a good guy, and he's a member of the Sanhedrin that just condemned him to die? And then let him put Jesus in a Jewish tomb. I mean, come on, folks. If this is not true, it's a stretch. The ramifications, empty tomb. The priest's explanation is the guard's explanation. We'll get into that. And they are rebuked. They literally are rebuked for their dim-wittedness. I don't know how Peter is called Satan by Jesus. Paul rebukes Peter about theological issues and so forth. So bottom line is, do they give enough embarrassing testimony? You can say you can believe this stuff. Yeah, I think we can give that a check mark. All right, coming down the end. Excruciating testimony. Excruciating, the word actually comes from the Latin ex crucis, which means from the cross. Folks, that was not a nice way to die. That is a terrible way to die. In fact, the Old Testament says you don't want to die that way. I mean, woe is be the man that gets hung on a tree, which is like ex crucis. So why would you want to write in your book that Jesus died by the lousiest, most terrible way you can possibly imagine? Unless you're trying to make a point. Why didn't the apostles simply deny Jesus when they're facing death? Right? Martyrs. These folks, I've got another one. We talk about where the 12 disciples ended up many, many years down the road. And most of them, except for John, most of them ended up facing death under very nasty conditions, really unfriendly conditions. And yet they stuck by their story. Jesus is. I get pushback on here from Muslims that says, well, we've got bombers, people strap the bombs on their bodies or fly planes into towers. And, so we're willing to go to our death for an idea. But they did not see Muhammad. They did not eyewitness it. They didn't read about it because Muhammad never claimed to be what they're dying for. Theirs is strictly an emotional thing. These folks witnessed all of these things in person. They knew it was true. They were not dying for a cause that I heard about. They're dying for a cause that they believed in. So here's some before and afters after his death. Animal sacrifice becomes Christ's sacrifice. Law of Moses becomes Christ's life. Strict monotheism becomes the Trinity. The Sabbath becomes Sunday worship. A conquering Messiah becomes a sacrificial Messiah. And circumcision becomes baptism and communion. Those are major changes. When you're looking at folks in a society, in a culture, and these sorts of things change, this is bigger than just changing your shorts. These are major, major changes. And when hundreds and then thousands of people make these kinds of changes in their life, they probably see something. They know something that we need to learn. Okay? So the apostles and the disciples were Jews that had an impact event. And what was that impact event? It's literally the foundation of our Christianity. Death, burial, resurrection. Who else can do that? Can anybody else go through death and burial and then be resurrected from the dead? Jesus. Okay. We've had a couple of those we had several people that were undeaded, but later on they redeaded. Okay. Jesus rose from the dead and then literally rose to be by the Father. All right. Give him another guess. Expected testimony. These are forecasts made about things that are going to happen in the future. How about in Genesis 3:15, human race, seed of woman? That whole story about what's going to be coming as a result of a seed of woman, hurting your foot, stomping on his head, and so forth. And that's back in Genesis, and yet it's hitting the target. The line of David. It's very difficult for a person to forecast before they're born who their parents are going to be. I mean, I just can't get my head around that. But they're the line of David, Jeremiah. Born in Bethlehem. How many people knew where they were going to be born before they were born? No. And then wrote about it and talked about it and so forth. Yeah, anyway. Both God and man. Again, both God and man is not your typical prophecy, typical forecast. Visit the temple in Malachi. Messiah dies around 33 AD. That's based on Daniel's calendar of 7 weeks and sevens. We're getting pretty close to the target here. The Messiah will be a sacrifice, Isaiah, bullseye. Those are just, 6 maybe? Jesus fulfilled over 300 prophecies in the Old Testament. Depending on how you look at them and count them up, 300 prophecies in the Old Testament fulfilled by Jesus. That is an extraordinarily rare event. There's a fellow that did some mathematical research, and what he did was he picked, I think, eight of the miracles that you couldn't possibly know unless you're in a godly mode. Like the lineage, I'm going to be born in Bethlehem, things you can't possibly forecast when you're not even born yet. And he added up the probability of each of those things happening accidentally. Okay? The probability of these things just accidentally happening, these 8 things. The number was so big, what he compared it to was flying over the state of Texas, blindfolded but a parachute. The entire state of Texas is 3 feet deep in silver dollars, and somewhere in the state is 1 gold piece. When you finally get tired of it, you jump out of the plane, pull the parachute. When you land, you pull off your blindfold, you pick out a coin, and there's the gold one. That's about the probability. I ain't searching for gold in Texas. All right, so we can give that one a yes. Extra biblical, last E, extra biblical. Jesus lived during the time of Tiberius Caesar. He lived a virtuous life. These are things that we're learning that are not in the Bible, that were in books extra biblically. These are pieces of information coming from the writings at that time from other people. He was a wonder worker. He had a brother named James. He was acclaimed to be the Messiah, crucified under Pontius Pilate. An earthquake and eclipse occurred when he died, crucified on the eve of Passover. Disciples believed he rose from the dead. Disciples were willing to die for their belief. Christianity spread as far as Rome. His disciples denied the Roman gods and worshiped Jesus as God. All of these points we can find in extra biblical writings outside of the Bible. Josephus is an example of some of this, but a lot of Romans wrote stuff about this time. And all of these things can be found in extra biblical writings. And where else can we find them? The New Testament. It's the story of Jesus' life, the New Testament. Okay. All right, last E. Can we give it a yes? Yes. Okay. With all those E's, we got through each and every E, give each of them a yes. So, is the New Testament true? Can we believe the New Testament is true? Let's look at the evidence. And we did. The 6 E's are absolutely true. So, the New Testament is fact, not fiction. If Jesus said it, then he really said it. And if the New Testament says Jesus did it, then he really did it. And you can take that to the bank. So that sets the scene for the next 6 Wednesdays about going. The New Testament is worth understanding how we got to where we are today. Okay, we got 1 minute left. All right. I realize next Wednesday, a number of you will be going to the Spanish class, the SSL. I wish I could do, but I'm hoping they'll teach it again. But again, go out to the YouTube, and each one of the Wednesday nights will be posted on YouTube with any luck the following day. I also post it to my Facebook page, but Facebook's going to delete the file in 30 days. So count on the YouTube page. Questions or comments? Q&A? We have 30 seconds left. I just heard a ding. Okay, sounds like I'm out of time. Ding. If you're going to be here next Wednesday, look forward to seeing you. And if you're not, then look forward to seeing you on the web pages. All right? Thank you.